here. So go ahead and accept the meetings being recorded, and I will officially call this meeting of the Network Advisory Council to order. Let's see, Tracy or Jenny, do you have a great suggestion for how to do introductions? I know we've got staff, council members, and the public here as well.
It's always kind of challenging. I would say probably NAC members first, and then staff and guests. And it's sometimes easier if you just call on them, Jody, if you're good at that. I myself am terrible at it because the names move.
Exactly.
It's hard, but I made a list, so let's see how I do.
Oh, you'll do great.
And then please, anyone jump in if I've missed you. So Sean Anderson.
I'm here. Do we need to introduce ourselves?
That'd be nice.
I'm Sean Anderson. I am a senior librarian at Imagine If Libraries in Kalispell.
Susie. Oh, Susie, you're mic'd, or you're muted, excuse me.
I don't think she has a working microphone.
Okay, can you hear me now? I'm actually on here twice, and I don't understand how I'm on. There's two of them open, and I'm trying to figure out which one is which. So I'm from Bright Falls Public Library. I don't know how I joined the meeting twice, and I will figure out how to just be on here once. Thank you.
It's great to have you even twice, Susie. But your vote only counts once. Okay, let's see. How about Lori?
Hey, this is Lori, Dome Public Library Director. What else do you want from me?
I think that's great. And Lori is also serving as our vice chair.
Yes.
Okay, and now next I see Mark.
Hi, Mark Weatherington, Director of the Bitterroot Public Library in Hamilton.
And Dorlin.
I'm Dorlin Rossman. I'm head of digital library initiatives at MSU Bozeman.
Honor.
Honor Bray, Director of Missoula Public Library.
Okay, let's see. Jonna.
Donna Underwood, Director, Sheridan County Library in Plentywood.
And then Dalton.
Oh, Dalton's with us.
He's on my participant list.
He's here. He's still muted.
Here.
Oh, good. Hi, Dalton.
Okay, Dalton is still muted. So let's see. I am Jody Moore, Director of the Red Lodge Carnegie Library and the chair of this group. We also have some NAC members who are state library staff. So Jenny, will you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. Jenny Stapp, Montana State Librarian.
And Tracy.
Tracy Cook, Lead Consulting and Learning Librarian.
Okay, I think we still don't have Kara. All right, so let's see. Let's do some other state library staff. Rebecca, will you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Rebecca Camp, and I am the data coordinator for the Montana State Library.
And Jennifer?
Hi, I'm Jennifer Burnell, Director of Montana Memory Project for the State Library.
Okay, Amy?
Hi, I'm Amy Marchwick, the lead system administrator for the Montana Shared Catalog at the Montana State Library.
Pam?
Pam Henley, consulting librarian with the State Library.
Okay, let's see. Oh, Suzanne? Suzanne, I see you, but don't hear you.
That better? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay, I'm Suzanne Rower, I'm a consulting librarian. Sorry, I might have muted myself too fast.
Okay, let's see. I apologize, Courtney. I'm not sure who you are. Would you introduce yourself? Okay, we'll skip over Courtney. Elizabeth.
This is Dave Shearer, Billings Public Library. The other two are also employees of Billings Public.
Ah,
Courtney and
wonderful.
Elizabeth.
All right, Courtney, Elizabeth, and Dave from Billings Public Library, welcome. Let's see. Who am I missing? Oh, Genevieve. I didn't have you introduce yourself.
Genevieve Lighthizer, admin specialist for the State Library. We also have a cell phone number, which you can see it ends in, or just a phone number, a 989.
Hey, Genevieve, this is Dalton with the Montana State Library Commission.
There's Dalton. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Did I skip over anybody? Please speak up if I did. We have present quite a large majority of our NAC council. We certainly have a quorum today, so that's great. Jenny, is there anything you want to say at the top of the meeting before we proceed on the agenda?
Thanks, Jody. I guess the thing I wanted to say at this meeting is that maybe we should consider this kind of a two-part meeting with our upcoming meeting in early April. So at this meeting, we'll be presenting a lot of background information that will inform deliberations and action at your April meeting. We knew that a one-day meeting in April probably wasn't going to be sufficient to get through a lot of information, especially discussions from our core services committees. And so I sort of consider today's meeting informational and foundational to help inform decisions for your April meeting.
Thanks, Jenny. And I know we're still early in this game, and so there may be acronyms or things mentioned that are still confusing. So I encourage everybody to ask a question if you need clarity, because it will probably benefit all of us. So let's take a look at the minutes. We have the final minutes for the November 3rd, 2021 meeting. We also have draft minutes for November 9th, 2021 meeting. Can we have one motion in action for both sets of minutes, or should we separate those?
The one set of minutes is just for record. The only action is for the November 9th minutes.
Okay, so does anybody have any suggestions for edits to the minutes?
Jody, this is Lauren. I would make a motion to accept the minutes as presented.
Wonderful. We have a motion from Honor to accept the November 3rd, 2021 final minutes as presented. Do we have a second?
I second them.
Go.
Oh, that was Lori.
Go.
Go ahead.
November 9th minutes.
I thought, do we not have to? Oh, because we've already accepted the November 3rd. Excuse me,
Yeah.
I misstated. So this is an action to accept the draft November 9, 2021 minutes as final. And Honor has made a motion to that effect. Lori has seconded that motion. Is there any discussion on the motion? Okay, I see head shaking. So all in favor, please say aye.
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 All opposed,
Aye.
nay. Okay, motion passes. Next item on our agenda is report from subcommittee regarding standing committees. There's a document in the packet to this effect, and this is going to be presented by Tracy Cook.
Hi, so Kara did a great job in her memo of kind of summarizing what the NAC subcommittee discussed when we looked at the existing committee structure. So I guess my first question is, did you have any questions about what was covered in the memo? I'm trying to remember, like, how long did Kenning say you need to wait, Dorlin, for ADA accessibility? I can't remember. It's like 30 seconds or something like that. It was really
10
useful.
seconds. 10
10
seconds.
seconds. Oh, thank you, Genevieve. All right. And then basically what we are looking for today is that the key recommendation from that subcommittee was to create a transition plan for the Montana Library to Go and Montana Shared Catalog Executive Committees, just kind of making sure that any duties that they do are covered, either through the membership groups or through Montana State Library staff work. And then we would dissolve those executive committees. And so that's the action we are seeking from you at the NAC. Again, we are going to try to make it clear to people that it's not that the Montana Shared Catalog or Montana Library to Go are going away, and that the membership groups are the governing bodies. And until we have a single cost share formula or a different funding mechanism, those groups will still be able to weigh in on the budget and other decisions. So that's all I'm seeking today, is just your approval of our suggestion to create a transition plan and dissolve the executive committees.
Susie.
Do you need a motion, Tracy?
I do.
So I move that the Network Advisory Council accepts the recommendation of the Core Services Program Committee and to create a transition plan to restructure the groups mentioned in the memo.
This is Sean. I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion from Susie and a second from Sean. Any discussion on the matter?
Yes. I think the thing that stands out, just from having been at the Shared Catalog Executive Committee, that I think are applicable with all of these subcommittees, is an ideal timeline for having those transition plans developed. And then some recommendation, and I know that it's laid out here in sort of a narrative format, but a sort of a template for the kinds of things that transition plan should include. You know, at the executive committee, or at the Shared Catalog Executive Committee, we talked about the admins doing a lot more in terms of managing communication between the members of the shared catalog. When the budget process needs to start and finish, there were a lot of those things that I think we can sort out. But if we can add in some recommendations or some best practices to just ease the development of those transition plans, that would probably be wise. And like I said, I know that it's in narrative format here, but having just a more template type format that people can just use.
Use and digest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sean, this is Jonna. Oh,
sorry.
Sean, this is Jonna. Were you thinking of more like a visual kind of timeline versus the narrative? Like, you know, at this time, this date, maybe not quite so specific, but along that line, was that what you were kind of thinking of?
No, I mean, the template would be more for, like, you know, how are we transitioning communication responsibilities at what point does, or where does budget planning fit into, like, of all of the responsibilities of these committees, who is then going to take them on, and what does that relationship look like? The timeline is basically like, do we want to have this done in 3 months? Do we want to have it done in 6 months, in the next year? That's just kind of an open question right now. And I think the idea with all of that is that this becomes more of a communication tool that is easily digested, that we can go to the membership of the shared catalog and very easily give them a document that communicates what the change is and what the transition plan is and when they can expect those changes to be in place.
Susie has her hand raised.
So I just wanted to point out that at least I looked at the Montana Library to Go bylaws, and so in order to do this, there is going to have to be some changes to the bylaws, because the bylaws reference the executive committee. So that will have to be noticed and voted on. So I think that the timeline, we're going to have to work backwards from when are we going to have the next membership meeting? Let's make sure we get those out to everybody. So I think that if we're going to try to have those membership meetings at the conference, or when are we going to try to have those membership meetings? Because if that's a pretty short timeline, because we've got to get that out. So I just think that that's really important too.
Tracy, do you see this as being work done by the same core services program subcommittee of this group, or state library staff working on that?
I actually think state library staff could start it, but they would probably want feedback from the subcommittee, but I actually also think they're going to want maybe 1 or 2 executive committee members to just kind of weigh in. I think that's pretty important, because we are going to have to look at things like the bylaws to figure out, what exactly has to happen to dissolve it. As Sean said, there's the budget. The group actually kind of made a list, and I have it in a spreadsheet format of some things that we needed to think about. So I think that's a good idea about putting it in a simpler, maybe easier to digest way. Amy, I don't think Kara's on yet. Do you want to weigh in on this as kind of the connection with the MSC Executive Committee?
Yeah, I think you're right, Tracy, that MSL library staff can start the process, and then obviously we will need those exec committees to weigh in. The initial conversation about this with the MSC as a whole went well, but they had a lot of questions. So I think the more people you have involved, the less likelihood you have to miss something. So
I think if this is a template or timeline that needs NAC approval, we should shoot to have something ready by the meeting in April, because when Amy, when is the next MSC meeting?
it will be in May sometime.
So if we could have something in place for them by that meeting, that would be great. And without Kara here, can anyone hazard a guess when the Montana Library to Go membership group would get together again? Susie?
I don't think we have anything scheduled. I did go through the Montana Library to Go bylaws and sent Kara suggestions. So, but I don't know, and because I asked her that same question, and I don't know.
Okay.
Well, if they were to meet at the conference like they normally do, that would be August, so we would have plenty of time. However, I suspect that those two things are parallel, and so if we're shooting to get the transition plan done for the MSC and the April meeting, I would think there's going to be a lot of similarities, and we could probably do Montana Library to go at the same time. I hope I'm not signing Kara up for something crazy. I don't think I am, but I will add that caveat just in case, but I think that's possible.
So I'm curious if there's any further discussion on the motion from anyone on the NAC or library staff or members of the public. Okay, I think that was 10 seconds. Presuming there is no more discussion, all in favor of the motion, I believe Susie made that motion. Please say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
All opposed, say nay. Okay, the motion passes, but Tracy, the work is not done.
No, Amy and Kara will do a great job.
Yes, they will.
Yeah, they're super smart.
Well, that leads us into our next agenda item, which is report from core services committees. And do we need Kara for this item?
You know, she asked me if I would kick it off, and then hopefully she'll be able to join us and answer any questions. So I wanted to start with, I won't go in alphabetical order. I hope that doesn't break your cataloger heart, Jody. But so that we save it for Kara in case she can make it, I'll start with lifelong learning. So Amelia has been meeting regularly with her lifelong learning core services committee. They started meeting in January, and they meet monthly for about an hour. And so far, the committee has kind of accomplished the following things. They've basically set up their expectations and ground rules. They've also discussed virtual programming in libraries. This came out of kind of the public library standards. And I asked Amelia if she would talk to her committee members about, did the libraries want support? Did they think they need support? You know, basically what ideas did they have for helping public libraries meet that new standard of having virtual programming? And she said the core services committee came back with a really strong desire for a potential MSL sponsored virtual program series. Basically looking at things like Author Talks or Humanities Montana, kind of things that really seem to scale well during COVID. And that seemed to get a lot of people involved. And so she has been talking to Kara a little bit about the potential of maybe using some of that one-time ARPA money to do that. So you might see a proposal for some kind of funding for that in April. But that is one thing that did come out of the group that I wanted to share. And then the other thing that came out of the group is the group really kind of strongly emphasized the need for training and support on material challenges. And so MSL staff actually did provide a couple of webinars. Pam and Amelia both took the lead on that and looking at collection development policies and material reconsideration. So those are sort of two action items that have come out of that committee. They are next up going to look at the evaluation framework template. And the only concern that Amelia had, and I think Suzanne's expressed it a little bit too, is applying that framework in these areas where there's kind of a multitude of programs. So Amelia's kind of trying to wrap her head around how to use that when she has kind of like ready to read. She has her entrepreneurship programming and some other things. So I just asked her, I said, you know, let me know how it goes and we can share that with the NAC because I said it's a living document. We kind of knew we'd need to make some tweaks. And then she's going to ask the group to identify some training topics that the librarians might need to support programming in their libraries on a statewide or regional basis. So it's kind of the lifelong learning report. Do you have any questions about that? So since we just talked about the evaluation framework, I was wondering, Jennifer, if you would feel comfortable about sharing your experiences. That group just did their framework, I think literally this morning, and Jennifer has uploaded it into your meeting materials. It's pretty interesting to take a look at it when you get a chance. But Jennifer, would you like to kind of share your experience working with it and any other updates on cultural resources?
Sure. So we actually took 3 one-hour meetings to fill this out. We focused the first hour on just these first 4 questions about what the MMP is and who we're reaching and who we are not reaching. And I had a very talkative group. They had a lot to say. And so that was interesting. Then we met again and talked about the next 4 questions and walked through those and kind of hashed out what we thought. And then today some of it I had filled in ahead of time, except for the last 3 about suggestions, kind of to give us just some guidelines so that we could keep moving and get this document completed before the meeting today. So the thing that they felt was that the last few questions kind of felt really repetitive, and they thought maybe that was because we had one program we were focusing on, the MMP, not multiple things like Amelia or Suzanne might have. So it might actually lend itself a little bit better to those. We'll see what they think. It'll be interesting because the single project they felt was just really repetitive with the last few questions. The big thing that came out of it was at the end, they kind of all agreed that since the MMP is on a new platform, that they would really like to see the breadth and depth of that. They understand that we're still learning how to use it. We're still learning how to best share it with end users, how to research it. And they felt like their big recommendation was that we really focus more on that rather than try to bring in more new things at this point as a library. We didn't feel like that was where the value lied. They feel like people want this content. And the biggest comment we seem to get, and this is coming through the Recollect platform itself, we have an email system, is that people can't find something they want in a digital format. So it seems like our gaps are a bigger issue than what we're currently presenting. People like what we have, they're excited to find what we have, but then they want more. So they feel like really focusing on developing the MMP, creating the policies for some of the new features that we could offer through Recollect, like transcription writing through crowdsourcing and allowing individuals to contribute content, as well as doing more outreach and creating more of that exhibit kind of content was more important to them than adding new services.
So do they feel like the gaps were like to a specific audience? I did see that they kind of mentioned certain counties were missing and then tribal populations. Were there other gaps or it's just kind of all across the board?
It's kind of all across the board. The emails that I get and that I shared with them, somebody in Billings said, hey, I have this Keogh Billings High School's yearbook. Do you want a copy? It's the 1913. It's missing from your collection. Versus somebody else who said, hey, I found my one family member's photo in Conrad's yearbooks, but I didn't find the other 3 because the 1930 whatever year is missing from that collection. And then somebody else asked, hey, do you have the 1969 Flathead yearbook? And I don't have any of the Flathead yearbooks. So yearbooks, that was a common question. Other things are, I'm looking for more information about this particular family member. Can you send me pictures? Can you send me any info? Do you have anything? And I'm veering people towards Montana newspapers a lot to see if they can find anything there. Letting them know that, Montana newspapers has more, but that's behind a paywall. Chronically America has more. I tend to send people to other sources when we don't have that content, but there's always something that somebody's looking for more photos, more documentation, more whatever we can provide. So that's a really common request. It's not that they're unhappy with what they're finding, they just want more of it, which I think Montana Library to Go experiences the same thing. So
all libraries experience.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone has any questions for Jennifer.
So Jennifer, maybe it would be helpful if you called attention to some of the information that's provided in the framework that currently stand as barriers to addressing those kinds of needs, and what the committee thinks might be best ways to try to address those barriers, and where they would recommend the NAC consider prioritizing resources to address those needs.
Sure. So I've got to scroll down on this document to find it myself. So bear with me a second while I'm getting there. So a couple of things that they said were hindering usage, and the barrier to usage itself was that they didn't have time to share with people how to use it, how to like really engage with faculty. For example, at the University of Montana level, when you look at the LSTA survey that was done on our site, only 9% of the total usage came from university campuses. The rest came from public schools and researchers from home. And then there was a small percentage that was out of state as well. But for the most part, the university systems aren't using it as well. And so the fear is that they should be doing more to integrate it into the faculty, unless the MMP staff could do that. And so that was one of their recommendations, that if we had an outreach person who was just doing that, that would really help. The other barrier was that adding content is an issue, and getting digitization funds is helpful. But the other problem that organizations have is just the time. These small organizations are so small, they don't have people to commit to creating collections. So that was a big issue. So we had several partners that we felt like they could help us. Teachers, they suggested it, as well as interns might be a possible solution to help us get information out. And then trying to think what else we covered, Jenny. I think they're in the final recommendations there, they talked about considering additional staff for the MMP, so that we can develop those policies and more promotion and outreach and engagement content, but also maintain the website and continue to add new collections and continue to respond to research and support tickets. So they felt like there's an overwhelming amount of work for 2 people to do.
And just a reminder to the NAC that one of those 2 people is just a contract temporary staff person right now, funded through ARPA dollars.
Thanks, Jennifer.
You're welcome.
So Suzanne is on this meeting, and she is the one kind of leading up the Technology Core Service Committee. So I was going to ask Suzanne if she would give a report on her work so far with that one.
Hello. We've met twice, and at least several of us have via Zoom. And unfortunately, I haven't been able to get everybody to any of these meetings or even to respond to when a good time for us to meet would be. But so there's 3 of us basically doing this, and we had some email consultations with one of the others. But been sharing, what we've been doing with the others and just not getting a whole lot of response. Our first meeting, we talked about, we spent a lot of time trying to get caught up with broadband maps and other resources for evaluating connectivity and digital equity and inclusion in Montana. So we looked at a number of resources from the National Digital Inclusion Association, Arizona State Library, etc. One of the members shared her experiences with the Hotspot program. And second meeting, we talked specifically about ideas for spending $140,000 in remaining ARPA funds. And the group offered some suggestions, buying newer refurbished laptops for patron use. We're looking at Delaware's Earn program, where people can earn devices by completing a digital literacy course, subsidizing training and/or classes, perhaps using digital navigators, subsidizing broadband for individuals or families. Dayton, Ohio has a program in their libraries that we're looking at as an example. Perhaps hiring a web designer to build a digital equity website like Arizona's, where all the resources can be easily accessed from one place. I sent out the evaluation framework and I got one response back on that. And, you know, she seemed to think it was doable breaking it down into individual programs. Because I think one of the things that's unclear is, you know, just what is the program that we're evaluating. You know, technology isn't really a program. It's a tool. And, you know, and that's one of the problems with a lot of these core services. You know, some of them are real programs that you can look at. Others are means to an end. And you know, technology is really means to an end. And so without, you know, we can look at a number of different technologies and presumably they're means to different ends, but without knowing what we're trying to accomplish with them, it makes it difficult to, you know, to just put it out there and evaluate it in that kind of a framework. You know, we're looking at it and trying to figure out exactly how to use it in that way, but it's challenging in that way. And you know, I think we probably could do a number of them for different. And I have to admit, I kind of got caught up in definitions too, because like 10 years ago, NAC came up with definitions of programs versus projects versus pilots. And so I was looking at the program and thinking, okay, this is the overall, what is our overall technology program? And not being able to figure that one out myself. And then kind of going back and forth with Kara a little bit about, well, okay, so maybe I'm looking at this and what we're actually talking about are individual projects, in which case we could be looking at hotspots versus the wiring thing and looking at each of those individual programs. But still, one of the things I got back from my committee members was that, you know, we really need to have kind of the background information for those as to before we can fill in, you know, for things that are being done in retrospect. You know, we need to have the background for that to do the evaluations. For things going forward, we could probably you know, complete the framework, but it's kind of difficult guessing what to fill in and making it up. So it's an interesting exercise.
Suzanne, did the committee or the people you're working with, did they suggest or discuss any overall vision for kind of what adequate technology or sufficient technology needs isn't quite the right word, but like if we had sufficient technology in libraries to meet users' needs, what would that look like?
No, we didn't try that. You know, we could take that up at our next meeting.
Yeah, I think that might be a helpful way to think
and
about.
Specifically in libraries.
In libraries or at home, you know, like you said, the hotspot lending program. From a user's perspective, what does sufficient technology needs look like? Because like you said, there may be a number of solutions needed to sort of realize that vision.
Right. Any other questions or comments or input? Because we're dealing with a big,
yeah,
a big area.
Absolutely.
right. Kara is now at the meeting, so I will have her report on the last two core services committee, the e-resources and resource sharing.
Hi, everyone. Yes, to add on to what I heard Suzanne saying and what we've discussed and what I've discussed with Jenny, I think that we are still doing the work of articulating what our outcomes are that these core services committees are going to be focused on, and where those might overlap with other committees and how we coordinate that work with them. And so this is all still a kind of a work in progress. The e-resources committee did an initial draft of the evaluation framework in the fall to define the scope of e-resources and to help identify current needs, specifically to complete the timely task of recommending an e-resources budget for the ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act funds that we had allocated for e-resources. And so that, as you know, was completed and approved by the commission in December. And so we are working on spending those funds as best we can. The committee has experienced some turnover for various reasons since that work was completed. And so we need to regroup and recruit some new folks for that committee before continuing with the next task, which will be to draft an e-resources collection development policy for the Montana Library Network, which, as we have seen from some of the recent challenges, that's a pretty important thing that we don't want to neglect for too long. So we hope to get that work underway in the spring. The other group is the resource sharing committee. And again, the initial work of that group has been to define what resource sharing means, because I think internally at the State Library, we have kind of an idea of what we mean by that, but it could mean a lot of things to different people, and a lot of ideas and brainstorming happened around that phrase. And probably this committee could revise its scope at a later time if other needs arise, or if we see other opportunities to support resource sharing. But for our immediate purposes, we're defining this as the sharing of physical resources between libraries. And so the courier, interlibrary loan, sharing groups, and this group has prioritized the expansion of the courier service to add at least a couple of new locations, to evaluate a tracking system to improve access to the data that we can use for program management and planning in the courier, and to evaluate the shared collection within the Montana Shared Catalog, particularly the sharing group collection, in the hopes that we might be able to support a pilot that could look at how collaborative collection development to some degree could help create some efficiencies at libraries, not to take away the collection development responsibilities or the very local needs of libraries, but to kind of streamline those things that everybody is already doing, which is always kind of what we're looking out for. So within the scope of what could we streamline in terms of collection development, any of the processes or the content itself, that is something that the committee is interested in looking at. And then finally, a couple of members of the committee were interested in possibly developing some kind of marketing or outreach materials for the partners sharing group to help citizens understand what it is, to help stakeholders understand what it is. I think people who use it know it and appreciate it, but outside of current users and library staff, to help explain what partners is and the value of partners. And we would expect that work to probably begin after the State Library has completed its rebranding process, because that might inform how our statewide programs in general could follow a more cohesive branding strategy. So that's where we are with those two committees.
So Jody, I think that is it from
Did we
us on
do
that.
collection management?
So I can answer that, Tracy, if you want.
Thank you, Amy. I didn't want to put you on the spot, but it wasn't
No.
on the report.
Yeah, so collection management, when we initially put out the call, we only had one person back when it was still integrated library system. We only have one person that was interested, and then they ended up on a different committee. And then we were in the throes of the RFP, which for the shared catalog, which would have been doing sort of the same thing as this committee at the very beginning. So it got postponed. Now that we're coming up on the end of the RFP for the shared catalog, I expect to be putting out another call for committee members for this core service committee within the next week. And then we will be going through everything that Suzanne and Tracy and Kara just described for them, where we'll start with that evaluation framework and definitions for exactly what we'll be looking at and going through that same process.
Hopefully, maybe some of the former current members of the executive board will choose to join the core services committee as their work on the executive board winds down. That would be nice. That's a really important committee, and it's concerning to me that you only had one person show interest.
Yes. Well, and at the time, the idea that it would be taking some of that work from that executive board hadn't been fully fleshed out. So I think you're right that we'd be very lucky if we could get some of our existing exec board members who to be carried over into that. And there was expression of interest in that from our current exec board members at the last meeting. So I think that's likely to happen.
I did have one general question. Are those core service committee members, are they online somewhere? Is that do we have a public posting of who's involved with those?
I was thinking the same thing, Jody. I don't know that we do, but I think that would
We
be.
are trying to get Aspen to work for that. And I'm sorry, I forgot to follow up with Amelia and our IT guys on how that's going. I don't know, Suzanne, I think you also.
Amelia and I think, have ours posted, under the committees, but I think she managed to get her committee linked to NAC, and I don't think mine has yet. It kind of exists. I'm not quite sure how you access it, but I can give you a link and you can get to it. But yeah, there's been some challenges in getting that all to work within Aspen.
Yeah, it wasn't set up for committees within committees, but let me drop the link in so you can kind of see the vision, and then I will nudge the IT staff because I think they have to do some hard coding of our website to kind of force that Aspen link to appear on the NAC page. So I'll put that on my to-do list.
Yeah, Bobby was really doing great work in trying to get this to work, and she's been trying.
Okay, any questions for regarding any of these reports or the core services committee concept?
I wanted to ask Kara with regard to the suggestions about adding some libraries to the courier or testing the tracking system, a collaborative collection development pilot possibly. Has the group talked about what needs we might have in order to help move those initiatives forward?
Well, just to the extent that that is addressed in the evaluation framework, of course, staff time and a budget to extend a discounted subsidized service to a couple of different places. And that might potentially involve some procurement work if we are not able to do that through our current vendor. We are aware that there may be other services that could provide that courier delivery to parts of the state that our current provider does not reach.
So a potential kind of secondary contract or something like that.
That could be a possibility, yes.
Yeah, yeah. And do we have any idea what kind of funding amount we'd be talking about?
Well, for a couple of extra stops, and you know, there's also the question of how many stops a week do we want to require as a minimum for the whole group, and I think part of that is we don't. It's kind of a chicken or egg question, because I think it would be nice to have some data about some tracking data that would help us to make better decisions about like what is the minimum stop time we need to keep things going around in a timely manner. But long story short, I think I requested about 50% more in the LSTA courier budget, which of course is just a subsidy, and the libraries paid the majority of that contract value. So it depends on which locations we add and how many stops a week we require. We already have ARPA for the tracking software provided. We can find a solution that works within the time frame of spending that award.
Okay.
I'm curious for those groups, the subcommittees who need to work on recruitment. Is there a way that NAC or state library staff can help encourage that, or those of us on the NAC can reach out to colleagues? Please let us know if that's an area where you need support, because I think the work of these core services committees is just crucial.
Yep.
I think part of it has been us figuring out how they work.
Yeah.
And one of the things that Jenny said that was really helpful for me, and I don't know why I didn't think of it this way, was when she said to Suzanne, what does that group see as the technology needs for patrons sufficient unto their needs? Like, I think that helped me a lot, because I feel like, you know, as I was talking with Amelia and Suzanne, particularly with Suzanne, it was like just so hard to kind of figure out where to start. And that's a good place to start. And that might help with the recruitment for those other committees, is just kind of say, this is where we're starting. And then this is what we hope comes out of that.
Question kind of, excuse me, along those same lines is, the committee asked me today what was next for them since we had finished the evaluation framework. And I didn't have next steps to tell them. I told them that you guys would hopefully guide us in that as an ACT and tell us what our next steps were. And then I would reach out to them again when we had a charge. So just so you know, that was the information I shared with them, because I wasn't sure.
Yeah. And I think that's exactly the right response, Jennifer, when we were talking about creating these committees and that evaluation framework. We said that at a minimum, we'd want these core service committees to complete the frameworks and then to review them annually to see what's changed, to see if there's anything else that we should consider. And maybe there isn't work in the meantime, and that's fine. And where committees identify ongoing work, that's great too. But I think, you know, unless the NAC has more specific questions or wants more detail from the core service committee, maybe it is just a matter of once a year coming together and helping us to evaluate the program. Are we meeting those short and long-term goals? If so, great. If not, why not? And where and how might we make some changes or more investment in order to make sure that we are meeting those goals?
And that was exactly one of the comments they made, is that this is a reiterative process, right? We're going to revisit this because they felt like it should be touched on again. So
yep, exactly.
That's exactly where they were.
Cool.
Jenny, aren't we also hoping that they give us funding priorities and actual wish list on an annual basis?
Exactly.
Because I mean, that evaluation framework is good information, but it has I don't think it has any dollar values attached to it.
Yeah. I was going to share that feedback with staff. I think the more concrete that we can be, the better in order to help the NAC with those, with the hard work to prioritize limited resources. We've heard Jen say, staff, ongoing and staff, and, we can certainly provide to the NAC the dollar amounts necessary to support that. I know we'll talk a little bit about the budgeting process here in a second, but I think Kara's got some ideas about actual costs to add courier libraries or libraries to the courier and that kind of thing. Ultimately, we're going to reach a point where we don't have enough funding to fund all of these requests this year. And that's where the next hard work comes to play. But that doesn't mean I don't want staff and these committees thinking about these kinds of needs, because if we're not talking about them, if we're not identifying them, then we don't have ways to solve them in the future.
It's interesting that you brought that up, because the committee this morning did ask me, when I asked them about what else should the state library be providing in cultural resources, they said, we know that resources are limited. And I said, well, if I were to say that money wasn't an object, if I threw the Bruce Newell at you and said, sky's the limit, they all said the same thing, that they'd rather see additional staff support for the MMP than that we actually try more things or do something new, because they felt like that was really the priority for them at this point. But I think that's an interesting question. And then to break it down into specific dollars, I don't know if that's something that should go back to the committee to answer Jody's question more specifically, or if that's something that the staff would do.
And in the resource sharing committee, I did ask them for some ballpark estimates on some of these things, and they generally deferred to us to do that work, because it's hard to say what something would cost at a state scale, and that is probably our responsibility for them to provide the outcomes or the services that they would like us to see what the contract value or service value would be for those items.
This is Hanor, and I would be concerned about only having committees meet once a year. I think that when people lose track of kind of each other, what they're doing on that committee, then it becomes difficult to pull that same group of people back together again. So if there were some way to just keep them together every quarter or something, so that you can keep that cohesive group, I think it would be really wise to do that.
This is Sean. I was going to say something similar. I think there's work that can be done more than once a year. The big one that stands out to me is the evaluation of the actual programs. If Montana Memory Project or any one of these subcommittees is requesting money from the commission, I think it's reasonable and expected to be reporting back on the impact of those investments. And so that, figuring out exactly what that looks like and coordinating the reporting with the state is not a small job. So I think there's plenty of work to do even in the evaluation and reporting realm. even beyond just the group cohesiveness and maintaining the culture that Honor was getting at.
Those are really great points. And to Sean's point about the ongoing evaluation, you know, with Jessica's help, we do have resources to help all the committees think about, you know, how are we measuring success? What kinds of data do we need to be gathering to help us evaluate our current services and do that reporting?
And it might just be where my head's at right now, but it's that reporting is really important from an advocacy standpoint too. This goes way back to the primordial ooze of this network advisory council. But having all of these collaborative services under one umbrella makes it much easier to tell the story about the reach and the impact that these services have. So making sure that that messaging is coordinated, that it's all speaking the same language, and is focused on impact and not just outcomes, I think makes it easier to advocate for all libraries, if not just these statewide collaborative services.
I would also add that I think my understanding of the kind of the vision of the Montana Library Network is it's to attempt to carry out the Fair Library Access Resolution. So I think it's really important that these committees talk about those barriers to usage and solutions as well, because I see that as moving us towards achieving that resolution.
I think the reporting this year will be interesting because so many of these core services have benefited from ARPA funding. And being able to show what you were able to do when you had more money and you had more resources and you had extra staff will really help us because it's proven benefits from future investment. I appreciated Kara recently sent out just kind of an overview of what, as far as the e-resources go, how those have been used and what we could do, promote them. And I found that really helpful. Something like the hotspots, obviously have been a pretty big success. So I think this year you guys really do have your work cut out for you because you have to kind of dissect that from the typical funding that you receive. Thanks everyone for your hard work. I know we're still in like this awkward growing stage with those core services, but it feels like it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. It feels like it will get there.
I think so too. Hey, Rebecca, I was just going to ask if you wouldn't mind dropping into the chat a link to the COVID funding related story map that you've been working on. It's a really nice snapshot of how the state library is investing ARPA dollars and the impact that they're having.
Absolutely. I was just thinking of that. I'll drop that in the chat.
Yeah, and I'm wondering too if maybe we want to add just kind of a standing agenda item to have some impact reporting. We can either highlight a program each meeting or just do a kind of a general overview of some of the fantastic impact evaluation that is happening, because it truly is remarkable the amount of work and impact libraries are having.
I'd be happy to do that. If that's useful to the NAC, I would be available.
I think we could have more discussion on core services, but does everybody feel comfortable moving forward in the agenda to the fiscal year 2023 budget process? Susie's giving me a thumbs up.
So the next two agenda items are mostly informational at this point. For a couple of reasons. We don't have complete information about funding, And also the core service committees are still continuing their work. But for your April meeting, there will be a couple of different action items that we will request from the NAC. First is to help the state library prioritize a budget for library development services. And as is said in the memo, we are currently hoping that Congress is going to pass an actual budget and not just a continuing resolution. Right now, as I think you probably all know, and it's starting to make headlines, there's another government, shutdown looming at the end of the week, and hope that Congress will actually pass a budget. What is included in the budget that Congress is considering is an increase in our Library Services and Technology Act based funding. I don't have an exact amount of what that would mean for us here in Montana. A nice bump if Congress does in fact act to increase our LSTA funds. And with that information, then we can have a more robust discussion with the Network Advisory Council about the priorities for how we would invest that LSTA funds forward. Because the state's funding is biennial, there isn't any kind of increase in state dollars at this midpoint in the biennium. And so any suggestions for increase or changes in services for our FY23 library development services budget would be based on an increase in those LSTA dollars. We are hoping to schedule some time with the Network Advisory Council between now and your April meeting for us to spend more time doing a budget training with all of you, so you know the processes and steps that go into helping us create a budget, so that you have a little bit more information and background. And if we can't find a time for the entire committee to meet, we'll make sure that that training is recorded so that other people can watch it when it be available. But it would be a chance for us to kind of walk through the budgeting process and timeline for the LSTA funds, and the budgeting process and timeline for our state dollars. So, I think the need from the core service committees, and we've heard a little bit from Jennifer and Kara in particular, is to identify those specific budget requests and dollar amounts, so that we have real information for the NAC to consider and prioritize at your April 6th meeting. And then it's been alluded to, we will likely have some additional ARPA dollars that are remaining. And so we'll want to use that information also to have the NAC help us prioritize how we might spend out some of the remaining ARPA dollars that we have. We did get an approved extension from the Institute of Museum and Library Services, so we can now officially spend those dollars out through December 30th, 2022. But obviously, in any kind of budget planning, we recognize that those are essentially one-time only monies that will be gone by the end of the calendar year. Are there any specific questions about the budget that I can answer at this time? I will be doing a very, very, very happy dance if Congress passes the budget by the 11th. Okay, why don't we move on to the legislative process memo? I wanted to share with you sort of an overview of the timeline that's in front of us. This information comes from the Governor's Office of Budget and Program Planning, that they are responsible for helping to craft the governor's budget and to work with agencies on legislation that has the approval of the governor's office. Legislation can always go through the legislative session without approval from the governor's office, but as an executive branch agency, for us to actually advocate for any legislation, we need the governor's support. So included in this memo is a timeline for the process that we go through in working with OBPP for what's called the executive planning process. That's the process through which we request our budget proposals and any kind of legislative proposals. So the first deadline for you to pay attention to is that May 6th deadline. That's when we need to submit to the governor's office any new Montana code or changes to existing Montana code. And then June 6th is when we need to submit any preliminary requests for new budgetary proposals. And then throughout the summer, the governor's budget office meets with agencies to better understand the nature of those budget proposals. And we refine those proposals and submit our final proposals on September 1st. And then the governor releases his budget on November 15th. And so over the course of the next several months, we'll be working first with you, and then with the State Library Commission, and then with the governor's budget office in the hopes of getting our budgetary proposals included in the governor's budget. There is, as I said, a process by which funding proposals can go to the legislature outside of the governor's budget through what are called cat and dog bills. MLA often carries bills or suggests budgetary requests that are outside of the governor's budget, for example. So in thinking about legislative requests, you've heard us talk about the desire to include tribal college libraries in the legislation that allows them to receive state aid funding. And so I've included in this memo the statute that I'm referring to right now. It specifically identifies public libraries as eligible entities to receive state aid funding. Our hope is to add to this language that would allow tribal colleges or some kind of tribal jurisdiction to be an eligible entity. I don't exactly know what that language would look like at this point, but something along those lines. I've had a chance to share this information with the State Library Commission, with the governor's office, both the Indian Affairs Advisor and the Lieutenant Governor, the State Tribal Relations Committee, and I'll be presenting this information to the Education Interim Committee next week. And so far, I certainly haven't heard any objections to this legislation. A lot of interest in trying to move this legislation forward. This change is fairly closely tied to the reauthorization of state aid funding, which is also due in 2023. Our hope is that at a minimum, the direct state aid to public libraries could be increased so that there's more funding to allow funds to go to the tribal college libraries without having any kind of negative effect on public libraries. But I did want to make you aware that at a recent Montana Library Association Government Affairs Committee meeting, they did discuss and are recommending to the full MLA board a more significant request of state aid funding. That recommendation is to increase the direct state aid funding from 40 cents per capita to 50 cents per capita, or a little over $500,000 shared amongst what would be public libraries and hopefully tribal college libraries. And then the request also includes about $4.8 million in funding that would support the Montana Shared Catalog, Montana Library to Go, the Courier, a hotspot program. I think, you know, under I should say e-resources more generally, not just Montana Library to Go, but e-resources to support learning across a lifetime. The e-resources that are available through public and school libraries, the e-resources that are available to academic libraries through Trails, the Montana Memory Project following under that umbrella of e-resources, and then funding for the OCLC group services contract as well. So again, the MLA board is going to consider that request at their April 4th meeting. And from there, we'll know whether or not MLA is going to move that forward. We will certainly here at the State Library make this kind of request to the governor's office as well, in the hopes that the governor's office may support it. Nanette asked me earlier if I thought that this kind of proposal had any kind of chance of going forward. And I said I'm sort of better than 50-50 chance that it may be supported. I think there's some really good, important arguments to be made about the foundational nature of these library services and the role that they play in providing that base level of library services that all Montanans should expect. And in the scheme of things, you know, $5 million in the overall state budget is pretty tiny. We've been doing some analysis on the history of funding from the state to public libraries. And one of the things that Tracy discovered in some recent research is that in the 1970s, the federations were sharing about $450,000 a year, which is basically the amount of state aid funding that public libraries receive, and more than the amount of funding that federations currently receive. In today's dollars, that's about $1.8 million. And if you think about the nature of library services 50 years ago, literally we're talking about 45 to 50 years ago, you know, it was books on the shelf. It wasn't all of the kinds of services that we're talking about with our core service committees. And so I think there's a compelling argument to make, and I don't think we have anything to lose by asking. So I hope that MLA is going to support this recommendation. The question before the Network Advisory Council then would be if we want to support the MLA request and recommend to the State Library Commission also that we support this approach for state aid funding. And that's a question that will be asked at your April meeting. One other piece of information that's included in your meeting materials just for your reference is a document that Rebecca prepared. It's an analysis using the public library statistics from IMLS. It uses 2019 data, the most current publicly available data, to compare the amount of funding that Montana provides to public libraries compared to libraries both regionally and nationally. I think it's a really interesting look at how Montana compares. You'll see that we are certainly very, very low nationally. So again, I think part of a compelling argument that we can make.
Rebecca, I found that document fascinating. I put a gold star on the top and will be sharing it with my board. Really interesting data.
I agree. I encourage you to look at it, at least in the comparison to states around the country, because as Jenny said, we are much lower than our partners around the country. So, thanks for the gold star, Jody.
So Jenny, thank you for all that information. I think you were pretty thorough in breaking it down for us, but does anybody have any questions for Jenny? regarding the legislative process, the budget process, as discussed. Okay, moving on the agenda, we've got Kara presenting the LSTA 5-year evaluation and new plan.
Okay. So in your meeting materials, you have a copy of the draft evaluation that Quality Metrics prepared for us. And I'm just going to briefly touch on the highlights from the draft evaluation and ask if you have any comments or anything you'd like to bring up about this draft. And then we'd like to give you a quick overview of what the 5-year plan preparation is going to look like and how that might tie in with an overall library development plan that we are considering drafting and the next role in preparing that document. So the 5-year evaluation, if you didn't have a chance to look at this, and it's a 72-page document, so if you didn't read the whole thing, that's okay. The executive summary pretty well covers what you would want to know from this. And the state library staff are probably more familiar with the content of the evaluation because a lot of it came out of the annual state report that we submit to IMLS. The program summaries were often things that we drafted or worked with the data coordinator to draft. So the evaluators, so just to back up a bit, we are required to do this once every 5 years. I know you've heard this before, but I just don't want to make assumptions about what everybody remembers about this process. We are required to do it every 5 years. Every state library agency has to do it and hire an independent evaluator to complete the evaluation to the specifications of IMLS and then submit that report to IMLS by March 30th. And so we went through a competitive process to identify a third party, which is Quality Metrics, and they have done evaluations for many other state library agencies over the past several years and are doing many others concurrently, in fact. So they have a lot of experience in doing this. As for the evaluation itself, so the evaluators looked at our programs and our activities that are in our existing 5-year plan, which technically runs from 2018 through 2022, but as you can see, it is just now 2022. So in practice, we have about 3.5 years to report on, and that's just the way that the timing is, and that's what the federal government wants us to do. So we report on about 3 years of activities. And so the evaluators look at each of our goals that we have identified in that 5-year plan and the projects and programs that we administer under each of those goals and determine whether or not they think we should consider it achieved or partially achieved. And their definition of partially achieved would be that things are already underway, but they're not completed, or we probably need more time or more resources. Maybe we needed to adjust our plans because of unexpected things that arose. That's kind of obvious that happened this time around. So things that needed to pivot, or things that could be scaled up, or anywhere where we might need to adjust our plans that might be considered partially achieved. So there are many different reasons why they might have determined that a goal was partially achieved. So goals 1 and 5 were considered achieved, which is collaboration and then goal 5 was, thank you, Genevieve, adequate support. And then the other 3 goals were considered partially achieved. So goal 1 is collaboration, and that includes our programs like the Shared Catalog and OCLC, the Courier, the Montana Memory Project, and e-content. So that's a pretty huge chunk of what we spend our time and resources on. It's about 40% of our LSTA allotment. That goal was considered achieved. And the evaluators drew on our data from the state program report, and they also looked at the survey data and the focus group data that they collected over the past year to make these determinations. So goal 2 is about 24% of our LSTA, and that includes the Talking Book Library, lifelong learning. This goal was considered very aspirational, and for that reason, perhaps it was considered partially achieved. We obviously, Amelia does a lot of things that are pretty big picture, visionary, long-term things, and so it might be impossible for her to achieve everything that we set out in that goal, and so that might factor into that. So again, partially achieved doesn't, it just means that that is kind of ongoing work in some cases. So goal 3 is community leadership, and this includes our continuing education program. That's about 9% of our LSTA. We have that listed as partially achieved, and in part that's due to the constraints we have on how much time and resources we're able to apply to that, which is a great need. And so goal 4 also partially achieved. We did a lot of work in this area, but it was largely funded with sources outside of LSTA, and so we didn't have any LSTA specific projects reported for this goal. And then goal 5 is our consulting program, statistics, E-rate, hotspots. This goal was considered achieved, and that's 24% of our LSTA. So our plan really focuses heavily on information access and serving the library workforce, institutional capacity. We don't do subgrants like a lot of states do that would send funding directly out to libraries, and then we would be expecting those libraries to report on their program, and it's a very different program. So where we focus on centralizing and providing equitable access across the state through these large centralized programs. So information access, institutional capacity, and to a lesser degree on human resources. So I wanted to ask if you had any questions about the evaluation draft, if you had a chance to look at it. Was there anything in this draft that you wanted to talk about today? And it's okay if the answer is no, but I wanted to give you that opportunity to chime in.
So did they ever, this is Susie, did they ever like circle back and do an evaluation of like the full 5 years? Or do we, every time they do an evaluation, it's of the 3.5 years? It just seems kind of silly to me. I get why they have to do it, but
like we're in this weird liminal space between the old plan and then the new plan. They don't, yeah, they don't really come back to the last year necessarily.
I feel like I'm a really bad state librarian when it comes to doing these evaluations. There are other state libraries where this is essentially their agency strategic plan. They view this process as their evaluation, their strategic planning process. To me, it's always more important for us to do our planning that's impactful for Montana. And that's why I think the work of you as the NAC and the core service committees is so important. I would rather us focus on our priorities and crosswalk them to LSTA priorities than to let LSTA priorities drive our work. So I guess my point is I'm less concerned about this evaluation. I think it's always useful to have outside expertise give us their reflections on the work that we're doing, and hopefully we can learn from that. But I think we do a fantastic job of planning and evaluation in state as well.
Jenny, that's why the Montana State Library sticks out all the time from other state libraries who don't make their citizens of their state their priority. And it's really quite obvious when you go to any kind of meetings where there are state libraries from other states that they plan and carry out their work as if they're a group of their own and not part of the library system in the state.
Yeah, I think that's so true, Nor. I'm not going to name the state, but I was really struck in the last couple of weeks about talking to a state and also our program officer who's been reviewing evaluations on our state program reports. In addition to this evaluation, Kara mentioned the state program report, which is a report we have to submit to IMLS each year. And our program officer was saying that he was just about finished up reviewing this state's program report because it was over 500 pages and they reported on 180 individual projects, which were the individual subgrants that Kara mentioned. So each of those projects, there may be some similarities in the kinds of projects, but not a lot of collaboration, not a lot of coordination, all viewed as their own individual projects from the individual grant recipients within that state. That same state librarian was on a webinar with me recently, and she described their state library's response to COVID. And she said it was the first time that the public libraries in their states came together in a regular ongoing way. They were doing it to collaborate and discuss how they were dealing with the COVID pandemic. And she saw that as a really positive outcome from the pandemic. But I was just really, really struck by the very independent nature of the way that particular state is choosing to organize how they spend their LSTA funds, which is, fine, no judgment there. But there's I think the obvious positive outcomes that we see from how we invest our dollars just in the collaborative nature of that library community, like you were suggesting, Honor.
Yeah, because, when I first worked in libraries, I was in schools, and the state library gave grants to individual libraries.
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of the same libraries that always got the grants because they had the most staff that could work on cool projects and whatever, and the rest of the libraries were just out there, and there was not that continuity that began once Darlene kind of took the helm and wanted to have some cooperative work between libraries, and it made a huge difference, and it's a much nicer environment.
Yeah.
So
Thanks.
Good job, State Library.
Thanks for that reflection. I appreciate it. We appreciate those shoulders we stood on before, for sure. Very visionary.
Okay. So the next I want to talk to you about the 5-year plan, our next 5-year plan. I'm going to put a link in the chat there, which is a link. This isn't in your meeting materials, but it's a link to our current plan, the one that is currently being evaluated. And just to give you an idea of, if you haven't seen it before, what goes into the plan, this is a document that is the format is prescribed by IMLS. And so within the state plan, we are expected to have our mission statement, a needs assessment that is based on the 5-year evaluation and advisory input, which of course would be you all, and then the goals that we hope to work on in the next 5 years or 3 years, and their supporting projects and programs. And then as Jenny mentioned, we crosswalk to the focal areas that IMLS has identified as priorities, things like lifelong learning and workforce development and things like that, and how we're going to evaluate and monitor the plan and what stakeholders we will engage and things like that. And so with all the work that we're doing with these core services committees, we're anticipating that our process for drafting this new plan will look a little bit different, and not only because of the structure of the core services committees, but also because we would like to draft a more comprehensive library development plan that is not exclusive to LSTA, but that factors in all of our different resources, LSTA or otherwise, and is would be more of our overall guiding document. And from that document, we would draft the document that IMLS requires. So we would be able to crosswalk those priorities from the library development plan to the LSTA 5-year plan. And our model for this concept, I'm going to put another link in the chat, which is the Montana Land Information Act plan, which includes many of the same components: the programs, the priorities, the partnerships, how they collect the data, and the budget for carrying out that work. It's just that it's not focused on one specific funding source or the priorities of a specific federal agency. It's the state agency, our agency's priorities that are driving that plan, and touches on where those different partners and funding authorities play into that work. And so that would be the model that we would hope to emulate in a library development plan. So the NAC's role would be to review and prioritize those goals after we have drafted a plan that is informed by the work of the core services committee. So as you heard earlier, the core services committees are in the process of or have recently completed evaluation frameworks, and we will review those and draft priorities based on that work coming from the core services committees, and hope to have a plan to share with you, I believe at the May meeting, because that plan, well, the IMLS plan would be due June 30th. And so we would need to have that work well underway by your May meeting. Jenny, do you have more to add?
No, I think you summarized it really, really well, Kara. I think, the kind of the one piece that I would add is that we talked about the FY23 budget setting process. So the recommendations that you consider at your April meeting, we would essentially plug into the budget component of the plan that Kara described.
Kara and Jenny, I'm curious how static these plans are. Like once you've set it, is that what it is? Because in 2018, we didn't know about a pandemic. Yeah. Is there room to go back and say, oh, things have changed?
Yeah. As far as the plan that we submit to IMLS, we have made changes to that plan. We did make a change to one of our goals in this past cycle, and so they are flexible about that. Our goals for IMLS are usually broad enough that they can weather some changes. We don't make a lot of really profound changes within those goals, but that is a possibility. And then certainly I would presume that with our agency level plan that we always expect things to have to adjust. I mean, 5 years is a very long time. So I don't even think that a library development plan would probably be reviewed annually.
Yeah, reviewed annually, updated as necessary.
Do we have any questions or comments for Kara regarding the LSTA 5-year evaluation and new plan? Well, thank you, Kara. That's a lot of work. And probably some of it is not fun work, really. So thank you for all of the time and energy you put into that. I'm curious if the group wants a 5-minute break or something like that for restroom or stretching before we move on to our next item, or would you prefer to keep rolling?
I would prefer to have a break.
Okay.
Thank you.
Jenny, do you think a 5-minute break, a 10-minute break?
We do 10 minutes.
Okay. So let's plan to pick up where we left off about 2:25. 2:25 on my clock. Let's see. You want to signal in chat or maybe raise your hand, turn your video on. Let me know if you are back with us. See some thumbs up.
I'm here.
Thank you. All right. So before we continue on, thanks everyone. Afternoon meetings are a challenge, I know. Thank you for sticking in here and staying vibrant. I see Hanor has her hand up. I don't know if that's to say she's
No, I
back.
just screwed up.
Oh, she's just keeping me on my toes. So the next item on our agenda piqued my interest, the single cost share formula subcommittee, or as Jenny has referred to it, the one ring to rule them all, for those who like Lord of the Rings references. So Jenny, let's hear.
Sounds good. Well, this is really a request for volunteers. We've talked for a long time at the State Library about trying to move away from individual cost share formulas for the Montana Shared Catalog. Montana Library to Go, we have a cost share formula for OCLC group services. They're all based on different kinds of metrics and other information that inform the cost share formulas. And I think having the formulas siloed creates a number of problems and barriers that could potentially be addressed if we have a single formula. One of which is, I know it makes it challenging for state library staff. I suspect it maybe is challenging for other library staff to plan for and anticipate changes in budgets for those different services that could potentially be better informed and give libraries better ability to anticipate budget changes if all of those budgets were tied to a single cost share formula. And two, I think they continue to lend themselves to this nature of siloed services that under the umbrella of the Montana Library Network, we're trying to get away from. I think if we have a single cost share formula, it then becomes more apparent what this umbrella of the Montana Library Network is that we're trying to create. Not that every library has to take advantage of every single statewide program. We need a cost share formula that still allows for flexibility for libraries to kind of pick and choose which programs they continue to take advantage of, but that they could see and anticipate what their costs would be for any or all of those services under a single formula. So that's kind of the vision, that's kind of the hope. I would love to see a cost share formula that encourages participation and collaboration, rather than uses metrics that kinds of discourages use of those kinds of programs. So I'm looking for people to volunteer to help us figure out what this kind of cost share formula might look like. This is a can we've kicked down the road for quite some time, and there is the potential to kick it down the road again, because if we are wildly successful in the upcoming legislature and the legislature just decides to fund these programs, potentially the need for a cost share formula goes away, or at least is greatly diminished. But I think it's in our best interest to start this planning now. Our hope is that we could have some kind of cost share formula in place for next spring's budget planning cycle. So if we had a process through which we're creating a cost share formula involving the committee and the Network Advisory Council, and right now these other membership groups that are organized around budgeting for these services, working together to bring some recommendations, probably to your fall meetings, and hopefully maybe action from the NAC in November, so that we have time to make use of a new cost share formula when we're planning for budget for these programs for next year, is kind of the timeline I'm thinking about. So at this point, I'm looking for volunteers, and I'm more than happy to do some arm twisting. You're welcome to volunteer today, or to let me know offline if you're interested in volunteering to help us put our heads together to figure this thing out.
Well, Jenny, I was on the committee that did the very first cost share formula, and it was a grueling process, but so much has changed since then that I think that it'll be a lot easier because of things that have gone by the wayside before. And since I'm going off the NAC in June, I'd love to help you, but that might not be long enough.
Appreciate that, Hanor, and I'll take advantage of any of your institutional memory before then.
Jenny, we've got a comment from Susie that she would be on the cost share formula subcommittee.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And Sean.
This is Sean. I'd be interested in doing that too. I think, and Karen, Amy, and Mark, for that matter, anyone that was in on the conversations about the shared catalog cost share formula, that was a really interesting conversation about how we divvy up cost equitably and responsibly. So as much as I can, I think I can try to translate that conversation to this one as well. The other thing that I would add, and not to derail things, I'm sorry. I remember at one point at the shared catalog, we talked about getting outside guidance on developing these. I don't know if there's somebody from the state budgeting office that would have some knowledge or some best practices that they could help us with making recommendations or translating our intentions into something more practical.
That's something we could research. I can tell you that looking at how we divvy up our state IT contracts causes us to pull our hair out.
Or if there's like some well-meaning economist that wants to dip their brain into this, that might be something to explore.
Yeah, I do know potentially a well-meaning economist. Dorlyn, do you know Greg Gilpin?
I know of him, but I don't know him directly.
Yeah, he and I have interacted a time or two, and he was in DC with me last week. So I don't know if that would be up his area of interest or not, but certainly something. And potentially we could have some resources, maybe even some ARPA resources to put to a little agreement with someone like that to help us.
That sounds like a good idea.
Yeah.
Jenny, are you looking to seat the subcommittee primarily with NAC members and state library staff at this point?
If you have recommendations for other people, I'm certainly open to others as well.
Well, I hope Rebecca comes in there with her data ninja skills.
I love that, data ninja. There we go.
Thank you. That's funny. I'd be happy to help.
Great. So I have Sean and Susie and
And
Honor.
Honor, as long as you have her.
Great.
Anybody else want to jump on, or as Jenny said, please let her know outside of the meeting if that's something you'd be interested in joining with. Obviously a really important discussion.
Yeah.
It really would be good to have some people from small libraries.
Yeah.
Because every size library has different concerns.
Jenny, I'm sure you can rope me into it if you need that. This is very interesting.
Great. All right, I appreciate your support. We'll get this ball rolling probably mid-April, I'm thinking.
Okay, and then Jenny, back to you for the NAC nominating committee.
Yeah, so just a reminder that the way we structured the new NAC membership, we have staggered terms. And so Mark, help me, I keep forgetting, Honor, is it Lori? No, who?
I think it's Lori.
Terms or 1-year terms initially. And so the process for nominating new NAC members or reappointing existing members involves a subcommittee of the State Library Commission. And so at their April commission meeting, I will be asking the commission to form a nominating committee. And I'm certainly hoping that Mark and Lori are willing to re-up for another, what would be a 3-year term now. And then I'm hoping that someone from the NAC would also volunteer to serve on that nominating committee to help us find a third person to fill Honor's seat as she's leaving us.
Jenny, this is Dora Lynn. I can do that.
Thanks, Dora Lynn.
Jenny, do you need to hear from Lori and Mark today about their interest in continuing?
Not necessarily, but I will ping each of you individually. Unless you want to say, yay, count me in.
This is Lori. I can stay on.
Thanks, Lori.
Are we ready to move on to state library update?
Sounds good. So I have just a number of updates that I wanted to share with all of you. Next week is our regular reporting for the Legislative Interim Budget Committee. This is the committee that I've mentioned a couple of times that is essentially our budget committee that we testify before each legislative session, and the committee that has responsibility for appropriating our budget. And this interim, they've been meeting quarterly in addition to during the legislative session. So that's just a really great opportunity for us to share how we are spending our legislatively appropriated dollars and the impacts that they're having. So that meeting is next week on the 16th. And just prior to that meeting on the 15th, the State Library and the Montana Library Association are going to share some information with the Education Interim Committee. The Education Interim Committee and our Education Interim Budget Committee are going to be meeting jointly for a couple of days. And at that committee hearing, as I mentioned, I'll be talking about the state aid legislation and the inclusion of tribal college libraries in that legislation. I'm also going to be sharing just sort of an overview of some of the history of state funding that has gone to public libraries to give some of the context and perspective that I shared here today and the information that Rebecca has prepared. And then the MLA Government Affairs Committee is organizing a panel of librarians to testify about the importance of library services. And I know Mark has agreed to serve on that panel. I think Lori may be a part of that panel as well. That is just, it's starting to tee up the conversations about the reauthorization of state aid legislation in the 2023 legislative session. So those hearings are available online. We'll be sure and include, share information about how people can listen to those hearings via Wired. You can either listen live or those hearings are also recorded and you can listen to the archive as well. So I encourage all of you to maybe take a listen and hear what information your colleagues are sharing. I also wanted to bring to your attention some fantastic information that Tracy researched and prepared for the State Library Commission at their last meeting on February 9th. And Tracy, maybe you could drop a link into the chat. Tracy has done extensive research on the history of the formation and changes to Montana's federations since they were first created back in the 50s or 60s. Really fascinating overview about sort of the original intent of those federations, the changing geographic boundaries of those federations, the funding that's gone into the federations, and the fact that the state library every 10 to 15 years has studied the intent and impact of federations. She's prepared all of this information ahead of a likely study of federations to kick off this summer. We're spending the next couple of months in our meetings with federations, reviewing this information and getting feedback from federations ahead of a study. Like other studies that have been conducted from the state library, we will likely seat a task force to help us to evaluate the purpose and the impact of federations. There is actual Montana code that describes the intent and purpose of federations. And so one of the questions we want to ask ourselves is how well the current federation model is meeting that legislative intent, whether or not we should consider changes to the legislation that forms those federations. We think an appropriate question to ask is where the scale of the size of a federation might be better positioned to support different kinds of services as opposed to the more traditional statewide approach that we've taken. You know, one example that comes to our minds is technology support. Might libraries benefit from technology support at the federation level rather than a statewide model? Things like that we want to contemplate and ask ourselves. And then importantly, in order for federations to effectively achieve the kinds of model services that we think are appropriate, what kind of funding might they need? This is a longer term study and one that, if it informs legislative changes, would likely inform changes in the 2025 legislative session. Certainly not something that we could accomplish in time for the 2023 legislative session. So just wanted to make sure that you were aware of the fact that this is a study that we are contemplating. As it pertains to the work of the NAC and the core services committees, I think it's important to think about some of the goals and the outcomes that we're talking about around these core services, and thinking about whether or not service delivery models might be appropriate at the federation level. So just something that we'll be keeping in mind as we go through the study, and as the study helps to further inform work of the core service committees in the NAC. Thanks, Tracy. I really do encourage you to take a few minutes to look at that report, because it's truly fantastic. We briefly mentioned the rebranding earlier, and if you're not aware, the state library is going through a rebranding process right now. We're working with a company called Hoffman York. That's a company out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, that has an office here in Montana. They currently have the contract with the Montana Office of Tourism, and we're just really enjoying working with this really creative group. They've been doing a lot of evaluation of the state library, our services, impact that we have. They've sought feedback from a wide variety of partners and our staff, our commission, members of the governor's office staff, some of our key legislators, etc. They also prepared a presentation for the February 9th commission meeting, where they shared their perspective on the work and value of the state library. And then that information has now been handed off to their creative team. And from there, their creative team is working hard to come up with a new brand, new logo, all of that sort of marketing material that can help us to really launch a very concerted media and marketing campaign in support of the state library. One of the questions that we posed to Hoffman York was about the name Montana State Library, and whether or not that was still an appropriate name given the breadth of work that the state library does, and the fact that there's some confusion when people think that we might be the Library of Montana State University. So I think the actual name might still be a little bit of a question, but one of the things Hoffman York came back and said really clearly is they think keeping the word library in our name is really important, because it's even though the nature and understanding of library work is changing, there really isn't any other name that aptly describes the work of the state library. And as I was thinking about that, I was really pleased that overall that they made that recognition. I think it would do a disservice to us and to other libraries in the state were they to come up with some other kind of naming convention for the work that we do. I think it by retaining library in our name, be it Library of the State of Montana or some kind of gobbledygook that they might come up with, it reinforces that the work of libraries continues to change and evolve. And the more that we can do to promote that message through the state library's branding and marketing campaign, I think the better it'll be for all libraries. So we hope to have a new logo and brand announced in mid-May. We're currently planning for a staff retreat sometime in May, where whatever Hoffman York comes up with will be revealed. So I'm really excited about that. I know staff are excited, and as you've heard, we hope it might help inform some of the marketing work that we do for other statewide projects. And then I just wanted to mention the resignation of Bruce from the State Library Commission. I think you all saw and know that he has chosen to resign from the State Library Commission, but remains actively committed and involved with the work of Montana libraries. He is very committed to helping to support the Imagine If Library and the advocacy work that's going on to support that library through an alliance in the Flathead Valley. And he knew that he could not continue to be an impartial commissioner tasked with reviewing potential challenges that might come to the state library and advocate in the way that he wanted to. So he made the right decision to resign his seat on the commission so he can continue that work. We don't yet have an announcement of a new commissioner. That seat is filled by the governor's office. And so we're awaiting an appointment from the governor's office to fill that seat. And at this time, I don't know exactly when that seat might be filled. The governor's office is taking applications. We sent out some information recently about how you can apply. So that information is also available on the State Library website. If you know people or if you yourself might be interested in serving on the commission, I encourage you to take a look at that information. And then the next meeting of the State Library Commission is going to be Wednesday, April 13th. So a week after the Network Advisory Council. And it's at that meeting that we'll be taking recommendations from your April 6th meeting regarding the budget and our legislative priorities. And I'm happy to answer any questions that any of you might have.
Jenny, with the open commission seat, I'm just thinking about like a library board. We've locally like made recommendations to the county commissioners about who we feel would be most appropriate to serve on the library board. Is there anything like an analog for that at the state library and at the state government level?
There is. It depends a little bit on the governor's administration. In the past, the Schweitzer administration, they gave no bearing on any of the recommendations that we might have made. The Bullock administration was very engaged with us in selecting new commissioners, and the Gianforte administration thus far hasn't sought our opinions on new appointees, but in this recent transition, they are actively encouraging us to find people to apply. I don't know that they will vet new commissioners through us or not, but they are encouraging us to have people apply. We have 3 new commissioners in the last year, Peggy Taylor and Kristen Kerr and Robin Scribner. And Peggy's from the Flathead Whitefish. Kristen Kerr is from here in Helena, and Robin Scribner is from Geraldine. And I have to say, I'm very impressed with all 3 of them.
Jenny, I just want to point out in the chat, Genevieve has shared links to the Hoffman York document, as well as the press release for serving as commissioner, recruiting people to serve as commissioner.
But it's not or anything, it's just like this.
I did have another, I guess it's more of a comment with the rebranding effort. Move cautiously. I think, I mean, you can use us as a test case. I think we've had a lot of success in rebranding very heavily. But politically speaking, it can turn certain groups off, specifically about removing the hyper local nature of it from the name. So I think I think the feedback about keeping the word library and state library involved somehow should be well taken, and I'm sure that it is.
I appreciate that, Sean.
I agree with you, Sean. When I look at like Idaho's, when you try to look for Idaho State Library, it's so confusing because they don't have a website that says state library. It's called, what is it called, a commission or something?
Yeah, Idaho Commission for Libraries or online.
Yeah,
like
that doesn't, for the average person, that doesn't tell them anything.
Yeah. I was thinking too about Susie's recent experience with the suggestion that they rebrand to the Alma Jacobs Library and the decision not to.
Jenny, I had one question in light of the current discussions around, you know, sort of the politicizing of collection development in libraries. Is that an arena where you see the NAC having, do we need to have a formal statement or recommendation in those areas? Or is that more the job of local boards or state library staff, or something that the commission would do?
Yeah.
Do we sort of fit outside of that arena?
That's a really good question, Jody. I'm glad you asked. I have a couple of thoughts. In terms of making a statement, I think no. The state library, we've been very careful to say that our role is in helping libraries to make sure that they have good collection development policies in place, that people are well educated and informed about the importance of those policies and the nature of the policies, and that importantly, they're following their policies. We're not weighing in on the political questions surrounding collection development policies themselves and the content in libraries' collections. That said, the Montana Library to Go collection development policy names the State Library Commission as the entity that would decide in the face of a challenge. And that collection development policy wasn't originally reviewed or recommended by the Network Advisory Council, but in future, if the committees recommend changes to that collection development policy, I would see that coming through the Network Advisory Council. And similarly with the e-resources core services committee suggesting a shared collection development policy, I could imagine a similar situation where if that committee recommends that the commission be the deciding body, that collection development policy would come through this body. And in essence, then it is this body acting as the staff advising the commission on the content of the collection development policy itself.
Have there ever been challenges to holdings in Montana Library to Go?
There have not.
Okay.
One last question, Jenny, with the state aid being a topic for the legislature this year, and with that being a point of contention here locally that has now been pushed up to the commissioner's level, does this situation threaten that reauthorization in any way? Or are you I don't know what the reality of that would be.
Yeah.
It's just kind of spinning around in my mind right now.
Yeah, that's a really fair question. It's certainly something that Nanette Gilbertson and I have spoken about, and I've actually brought it up with the Lieutenant Governor. And I had a conversation with Representative Frank Garner from the Flathead, who carried that legislation in 2017. Our sense right now is that people might talk about it. There might be some bluster about it. There wouldn't necessarily be an effort to not reauthorize the state aid or to hinder at least current level funding. New funding is always a challenge regardless, but I think we could make an argument. I think MLA could make the argument that the situation in the Flathead shouldn't threaten funding for other libraries and other communities across the state, and legislators would understand and respect that. Essentially that with as little disrespect as possible, bad actors in the Flathead shouldn't threaten the funding across the rest of the state. And I think we could successfully make that argument. What has been suggested is there could be proposed legislation that would decouple state aid from the public library standards, so that there would no longer be a tie. That coupling of state aid and the standards actually exists in administrative rule, so it's not as obvious a path to decouple it through statute. Somebody would have to introduce a new legislation as opposed to modifying existing legislation, which makes that path a little bit more challenging. But that is certainly something that we're anticipating and potentially preparing for.
And then similarly, have you heard any mention of legislation like that that's going through Idaho right now? About
I haven't.
I just read that. I just got the article and it is very disappointing. Like very, very disappointing. It came over across the mail earlier this morning, and they're saying that librarians can go to jail for checking out books to children that are deemed inappropriate. And this morning I was trying to figure out how I could get in contact with that journalist and give him my opinion about how parents should be raising their own children and going into libraries and picking out books with their kids and stuff like that. And why are librarians have to be responsible for somebody else's kid and raise all these kids and tell them what they can and can't read? It's just not right. And so, no, it's really sad that Idaho passed that. Disappointing.
Thanks. I'll take a look at that article.
I pasted the link to the article that Pamela Benjamin shared this morning on Wired. So there's not a lot of information there.
Yeah.
So it's not clear.
And there's permutations of this kind of legislation cropping up in legislatures all across the country. I know the MLA Government Affairs Committee is recommending that MLA adopt resolutions in support of intellectual freedom and opposing any of these kinds of challenges. Those resolutions, I think, will be brought to the MLA board into the membership meeting on April 4th. So encourage you all to try to prioritize attending that meeting. And then by passing those resolutions, I think it sets the stage for the state library and MLA to be prepared to anticipate and respond to those kinds of legislative challenges should they arise.
But Jenny, just to clarify, as in terms of the NAC as a whole, you're not interested in us taking a political stance on any of these divisive issues?
Not at this time. The public library standards question that Sean asked is one that is under the statutory authority of the library. And so that is one where if the standards are challenged or there's this request that we make changes to the standards, we would have to go through an administrative rules process that involves public comment. But that is an issue where I would anticipate the commission seeking feedback and recommendations from the Network Advisory Council as well.
Do we have any
Don't worry, I
additional-
don't go rogue regularly.
Oh, yeah, it's tempting these days, Lori. I agree with you. At least have the conversation with yourself in the shower.
Yeah. I would ask that you pay attention to the April 13th commission agenda when it's posted, because we have sent an invitation to the Imagine-If Library Board to be at that meeting so that we can better understand both their concerns and the nature of any kind of requests that they might make of the State Library Commission. And as I said, any potential action that they might ask of the commission would likely result in a request for feedback from the NAC.
Are there any additional questions or comments regarding the state library update? Okay, hearing none, we have a fun agenda item. Recognition of Honor Bray and the lovely resolution.
Can I ask Tracy to read this resolution?
Because you want to hear me cry?
No, because Tracy told me that it took her just a few minutes. This resolution essentially wrote itself, and Tracy was the one that drafted it.
Okay, Honor, I'm not putting my video on because I will cry. Resolution honoring Honor Bray, Library Director, Missoula Public Library. Whereas Honor has worked for Montanans and Montana libraries throughout her library career, using her quiet passion and positive outlook to influence change. Whereas Honor has led with a vision centered on community service and has worked tirelessly to achieve that vision not only in her own community, but across Montana. Whereas Honor has graciously mentored other librarians, directors, and Montana State Library staff, thank you, Honor, and courageously and compassionately spoken up for all sizes of libraries. Whereas Honor's commitment to libraries and library service has led her to volunteer her time on the Network Advisory Council, other library task forces, and within the Montana Library Association. Therefore, be it resolved that the Montana State Library Commission recognizes Honor Bray for all her years of service. Thanks Honor for her commitment to the Montana State Library and the Montana Library community, and wishes Honor all the best in her retirement.
Well, when I read this, I was just amazed, but I am not the only person that has enjoyed doing this throughout the years. You all are part of that also. I don't know any Montana librarian who doesn't do the same thing, but thank you for the honor.
Thank you, Honor. The State Library Commission passes resolutions sparingly, and they're truly in honor and recognition of people who have shown such dedication and such support to our work at the State Library and for the Montana Library community. And you know, I know I first met you through the shared catalog and our continuing work with the Network Advisory Council and as Federation Coordinator. And some of you might not know that Honor was a recommendation for me for the state librarian position 10 years ago, a little more than 10 years ago now. And so you hold a very high place in my regard and in my heart, Honor.
Thanks, Jenny. You are an amazing state librarian. We had a good time trying to get you into this position.
Honor, will you share with us your retirement plans?
I really don't have any other than to stay home for a while and do a little traveling with my sister and go to my grandson's graduation in Texas and then see what happens after that.
Like maybe joining the State Library Commission?
I've thought about it.
Well, keep thinking, but you should also enjoy your break because you know you still have so much to give to the library community.
I will miss the libraries a lot. They've been part of my life for a long time.
Yeah.
Well, the good news is you have plenty of them to travel around and visit. You're
That's
always
right.
welcome.
Yeah, I have lots of great friends all over the state and in many other states. So libraries are good places.
Yep.
And in September, Library Journal will be doing their Design Institute at Missoula Public Library. Be kind of facilitating that. And so if any of you are interested in doing any kind of remodels or building in your communities, you should apply to Library Journal for one of the scholarships to attend that. It's a 1 day, I can't remember exactly the day in September because we've changed the date so many times. But it is really a fun experience and Library Journal pays for all of it. So it's a great thing to get to do.
Well, that's going to be the most feel-good thing ever on an agenda. Let's see. Next up, we've got other business and announcements, but I guess before we get into that, I'd love to spend a couple moments thinking about our next meeting. The date is set for Wednesday, April 6th. I don't think we have times down for that meeting, nor have we discussed whether we would want to be in person or meeting via Zoom or in a hybrid scenario. Jenny, do you have any thoughts?
Only that the State Library Commission is going to start meeting in person again. Our April meeting is going to be in person. We will still offer a Zoom option, but I think we're comfortable now starting to meet in person. And to the extent possible, I think the kinds of deliberation that the Network Advisory Council is going to be asked to do lends itself to face-to-face discussions. I don't know that we could pull off getting a room block and that kind of thing if people are needing to stay the night and do that kind of thing in April. I don't know if Genevieve has any thoughts about that.
Try. Yeah, I could. Since it's not a peak tourist time, I might be able to get a block at the DoubleTree downtown.
I did look at our calendars and it looks like Genevieve had put a holding spot of 9:30 to 2:30 on our calendars for that day.
Thank you, Dorlin. So if a meeting starts at 9:30, those of us who have to travel some distance probably do need to come the day before.
Would you like Genevieve to look into a room block and if we can get one, go ahead and plan for as many people as possible to come in person?
Yes. I see some heads nodding.
Okay, I will do that. And I'll email you guys tomorrow, let you know if we can get enough blocked rooms.
Genevieve, is it helpful if people let you know whether they would be looking for a room or not?
Yeah, let's get a quick head count. That way, in case we're limited, I know exactly how many we might need. So how many people would be interested in traveling to Helena?
Okay, let's see. What's the best way to do this? Because some of us are on video and some of us aren't.
Just want to.
Doralyn and Sean raised their hands.
Okay. And you, Jody, yes?
Yes,
Okay.
Jody.
Jonah.
Yeah, John is coming from far away. Mark would probably just drive up that morning, so would
That's
not
true.
need a room.
Yeah, that's true for me too.
Okay.
I would also just drive up that morning.
Okay.
Lori's hand is up.
Okay.
For
5.
a room, I think.
Yep. Shawnee, you sure that's a ways?
It's 3 hours. It's not too bad. I'm an
Okay.
early riser.
Okay.
Okay, so I will block, try to block 6 rooms.
Would state library staff, would anybody there need rooms?
I just want to say I would be so happy to see you all in person.
And
I just feel like emotional even thinking about going somewhere for work. Yay.
Let's do it. Let's make it happen.
All right, who has an in with the weather? That's my biggest concern in an early April meeting.
Yeah.
Well, we're supposed to have our Broad Valleys tomorrow, and I've been organizing it, and I got a call from Suzanne, and she's like, "Oh, the weather's really bad, and I'm not gonna come in person," and all this. And I was like, "Oh, is everybody gonna cancel on me after I did all this work?" But only one person so far, so hopefully.
And then I guess we were missing Erin today, so I don't know, would she need?
Oh, she might need, I'll just do 7. I'll just book 7. And that way we'll have 1 in case, yeah. Kara, did we need to do a poll about a meeting in between now and the next SNAC meeting?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up.
Okay.
I was going to ask if we wanted to share a
Yeah.
link to that here in this meeting or immediately after the meeting for the legislative budget overview online brief meeting that Jenny mentioned earlier.
I think probably an hour would be sufficient for that training.
So hang on. I don't have one created. Let me see if I can do it really quick.
And Jenny, the April 6th meeting, we would have the ability for folks to attend via Zoom if they weren't able to travel or weren't comfortable.
Yeah.
All right, I probably can't create it quick enough. Sorry, guys. But so I will email that out tomorrow. So I'll email the hotel's decision, and I'll email out a poll for a quick meeting in between now and then.
Sounds great.
And then we'll get a date on the calendar. Right now, just looking at, when it looked at MSL staff's calendars, we're looking at March 16th, 17th, and 18th were kind of the dates where people here had availability. So we're trying to schedule it in those 3 days, block of time in those 3 days. So.
Okay, good.
And Jenny, do you think 9:30 to 2:30 is a reasonable timetable for our April meeting?
I hope so. You know, we've gotten through at least one core services committee report, and hopefully we can get some more detail from the others. But I think that's where we need to to spend sort of the bulk of some time hearing from them about what priorities and funding recommendations they have. And then time for the NAC to debate and help us to prioritize any funding requests. And as soon as I know whether or not we have an increase to our LSTA funds, I'll let you all know too.
Okay. And remind me logistically, the state library would provide lunch that day?
Yep, we'll provide lunch, pay for the hotel lodging, and reimburse people for mileage and per diem for travel days.
Any questions, comments about that April meeting? I love to see everyone's enthusiasm at the idea of getting together in person. That's wonderful. Any other business or announcements from members of the NAC, from state library staff, or from the public? All right, are we going to adjourn this meeting an hour and 10 minutes early? Yay! I would entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I so move.
Wonderful. Susie has moved. I don't think we need a second, do we?
No.
Well, thank you, everybody. Please have a wonderful day. I don't know if you all got snow in your neighborhoods, but hopefully you can go play in it if you did.
Thanks, Jody. Great job. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Or shovel. Yes, Suzanne.
Yeah.